All right, hey everyone, welcome back. You know how much we love diving deep, and today, well, we're going deep, really deep. We're talking about Arcane, but not just like the cool fights or animation, though that's awesome, obviously.
Of course, of course.
No, we're going deeper to the core of it all.
Yeah.
We're tackling loneliness in Arcane, and we're not just theorizing here. We've got some serious academic analysis to back us up. So get ready because this stuff, it's heavy, but it's also, I think, going to make you see the show, even yourself, in a whole new light.
It's really fascinating stuff. You know, you think loneliness, you think, okay, being alone, but Arcane shows us it's so much more than that.
Yeah, exactly. And we're better to see that play out than in a city as messed up and divided as Piltover and Zaun, right?
Absolutely. A perfect backdrop for exploring those different facets of loneliness.
For sure. So let's start with, I mean, come on, you can't talk Arcane without talking about VM and Powder.
Yeah.
Jinx,
Yeah.
eventually, right?
Right.
But those early episodes, their relationship, it's like the heart of the show, right? And when it breaks, it's brutal.
It is. It's one of the most potent depictions of how misunderstanding, loss, it just breeds loneliness.
Yeah, and the way it hits each of them, it's so different, you know?
Absolutely. This analysis we're looking at, it talks about this, it calls it a chasm of misaligned intentions and unspoken pain.
Whoa.
Right. It's heavy stuff, and you see that play out, right? Vi, she goes inward.
Totally. Like all that guilt, the longing for her sister, it just eats her up inside.
Exactly. And then you have Jinx, she explodes outward. All that pain, that abandonment, it turns into this chaotic energy, this self-destructive spiral.
It makes you think how much of Jinx's, the path she goes down, how much of it is driven by that loneliness, right? Like, is it the root cause or is it more about, the trauma of what happened?
It's hard to say for sure, and I think that's part of what makes the show so good, you know? It doesn't give easy answers, but what's clear is that feeling of being utterly alone, of feeling like no one understands you, it can push people to extremes.
Yeah, and sometimes those extremes, they're not pretty. It's tough watching those two, that bond they had, to see it just shatter.
It really is.
Okay, so we've got V and Jinx, but then there's this other dynamic that shows, like, another side of loneliness, right?
Definitely.
We're talking about Jace and Victor.
Ah, yes.
So different from the sisters, but just as powerful, I think. They're both these brilliant minds, so ambitious, driven to push science technology to its limits. But it's like that very ambition, that desire for progress, it ends up isolating them.
You hit the nail on the head there. It's like a double-edged sword, that ambition.
Yeah.
Look at Jace, for example. He achieves success, reaches the top, right?
Right.
But he finds himself increasingly isolated. His achievements, they come at a cost, and that cost is his connections, his relationships.
Yeah, it's like he's trading one type of connection for another, and it's not a good trade, not in the long run.
Not at all. And then we have Victor. His loneliness, it stems from something even more fundamental. His own mortality.
Right, that whole struggle with his health, it just weighs on him.
Absolutely. And that, combined with his obsessive focus on hex tech, this fusion of magic and tech, which, by the way, the show does an amazing job of using to show us both the potential and the dangers of pushing those boundaries, it creates this really profound existential loneliness. He's fighting against his limitations, desperately trying to overcome them.
And it's so sad because, I mean, he and Jace, they started with this shared dream, right?
They did.
This grand vision for the future. But it's like, as they go down this path, their paths split. They become, I don't know, like two ships passing in the night. And that loneliness, it gets even worse because they can't bridge that gap.
Exactly. They're right there next to each other, but it's like they're speaking totally different languages.
It's like they're drifting further and further apart, even as they're working towards the same goal, in a way.
Yes, and that initial partnership, the one that held so much promise, it becomes another source of isolation for them both.
Okay, so we've got broken bonds, the isolating power of ambition, but then there's Silco. And he brings a whole other layer to how Arcane deals with loneliness.
Silco, he's a fascinating case. He's almost like loneliness personified in a way. And it's all by choice. At least that's what it seems like at first.
Yeah, that whole I built my empire on the backs of my enemies kind of vibe.
Exactly. He shuts himself off, builds these walls around his heart, chooses power, control over vulnerability, over connection.
But then you see him with Jinx, and it's like, wait a minute, there's something more there.
Yes. There's this unexpected depth. Underneath all that ruthlessness, he craves connection. He sees in Jinx this reflection of his own pain, his own isolation.
Yeah. And that line, remember, you're perfect as you are. It's not just him being manipulative, it's deeper.
Right. He's expressing this deep need to be understood, to be accepted, even with all his darkness.
It's like all those messed up things he does, it's like his way of trying to fill that void, you know?
In a way, it makes him relatable. It doesn't excuse his actions, but it helps us understand the roots of his behavior.
Yeah, it's like he's trying to build a family, but he's going about it all wrong. Totally wrong.
And I think that speaks to the environment he came from. Zaun, it's a harsh place. Vulnerability, it's seen as weakness.
So we see these characters battling loneliness. But it's not just them, right? It's
Wow.
like Piltover and Zaun themselves, the cities. They're reflections of this whole theme.
Absolutely. The setting isn't just a backdrop, it's like another character in the story.
Totally. You look at Piltover, all those shiny towers, advanced tech. It's like this embodiment of ambition and progress, but also loneliness.
It's a perfect image, isn't it? It's all gleaming on the surface, but underneath, it's hollow.
Yeah, all that greed, the social hierarchy, the bureaucracy, it creates this isolation. Like people are surrounded by others, but they're still alone.
Emotionally disconnected. And then you have Zaun, which presents a whole other type of loneliness.
Right, a loneliness born out of like desperation, just trying to survive.
Exactly. It's a dog-eat-dog world down there. Trust is a luxury most can't afford.
But even with all that, there's this sense of community, right? This resilience that you don't really see in Piltover.
It's fascinating, isn't it? Two sides of the same coin. Both lonely, but in such different ways.
It's like they're mirrors reflecting back these twisted versions of each other.
A perfect visual representation of how complex loneliness can be.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about Arcane, but like, why does this resonate? Why do people connect with this show, with this theme, so strongly?
Because it's universal. I mean, who hasn't felt lonely at some point? Right?
Yeah, no matter who you are, where you come from, it's something we've all experienced.
The pain of losing someone, the isolation of chasing your dreams, feeling like no one gets you. Those are human experiences.
And Arcane doesn't just show us that loneliness, it shows us what it can do to us.
The choices we make, the extremes we're pushed to.
Yeah, it's like this cautionary tale, reminding us that connection, it's essential. Even when we're chasing goals, building careers, we need to remember the people in our lives.
We need to seek understanding, prioritize those relationships. We're not meant to be alone.
So to wrap this whole thing up, Arcane, it gives us this incredibly nuanced look at loneliness. It's not just about being alone, it's about the reasons, the effects, the different ways it shows up in our lives.
And it leaves us with questions, important ones.
Yeah, and I think as you watch or rewatch the show, think about this. Where in your own life, where do you see the potential for, I don't know, reconciliation? Are there relationships that need mending? Bridges to be built? Is something to really think about.
It really is. Arcane, it offers a glimpse into our own humanity, a reminder that even in the darkest times, there's always hope. Hope for connection, for healing.
And that's it for our deep dive, folks. Thanks for joining us as we explored the many faces of loneliness in Arcane. It's been real.